So with great pleasure, I introduce Kevin Peter Hickerson.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the main thing I got out of the previous talk was not to drive through Utah, but I might not have been able to follow it all. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, the future of energy. I've been working on energy for a long time. My specialty in physics is in nuclear physics. I've also spent a great deal of my life working on solar and solar concentrators. And so I'm going to talk about my vision for where I think we need to move from now and into the distant future. Okay, so this is a picture of Earth. You guys all know it. You live here. And this particular picture is from February 2016, which also happened to be the hottest month above ever recorded. In particular, it was 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the entire 20th century average. This is probably not an unusual claim. I'm sure you guys have heard of this before. It was a little bit more interesting in that even though it was winter, this actually occurred mostly in the northern hemisphere, this anomaly. And the land temperature is on average 4 degrees Fahrenheit on the land of if you averaged over the entire land of the world. Now, I know that in the ongoing pre-presidential debates, this is a controversial topic, but to scientists like me, it's not really considered very controversial about what the main cause is, and that is primarily driven by anthropogenic greenhouse gases, in particular carbon dioxide. So that kind of brings you to now what? I mean, if this is the scenario that's true, and this is the only major problem with greenhouse gases and fossil fuels, which I'm sure you guys have heard mentioned all over the place to you, what are the alternatives? I'm a nuclear physicist, so to me, at the moment, the absolute best alternative to fossil fuels is nuclear power. There are 30 countries in the world where over 70% of energy actually currently comes from nuclear power. And I know that this is also controversial, but I'm just going to try and beg you to deal with it for now. Now, I know a lot of the criticism that people get is they somehow think that this is that there's a very strong advocacy out for nuclear power from the industry itself. But I can assure you that I'm actually in the solar industry. I've never worked for a nuclear power company in any way, and I haven't seen this advocacy. I would like to see it, but I think for the most part, companies that have a vested interest in it don't even participate in it anymore because they know how incredibly unpopular it is. Okay, so I know this can be very difficult to. Nuclear energy has this a grab on people that's pretty impressive in that it's really terrifying. And I got to be honest, I was in that camp for most of my life also, and it wasn't really until I got a PhD in nuclear physics that I decided that I thought it was safe enough. Unfortunately, that's a kind of a bold claim. That's a really high bar to set for everybody, especially the public. This is one of the many reasons that I'm very strongly a supporter of solar power for this century, and I think this century will be known as the solar power century. A big myth that should be dispelled is that solar power has no environmental consequences. That's just not true. It does. It creates poisonous, toxic side effects in manufacturing the panels. It has an effect on wildlife, and then of course the most major thing that people notice is that you have to actually occupy the land that requires the energy collection. Solar power is, unlike nuclear power and coal and things like that, it's a diffuse energy source. So wind, which is actually just another form of solar power, believe it or not, and solar, both the power that's generating it, the sun, spreads it out over a large area, and the only way you get that power back is to then concentrate it again and turn it back into the high energy original source that the sun provided. You'll notice that I said that this is also known as fusion power because, of course, all solar energy comes from the nuclear energy generated in the sun. The big catch, though, is that that's at a far distance, so we don't have to worry about the side effects of nuclear energy here on Earth. Okay, so why would I be pro-nuclear when it's so goddamn unpopular? I made this little chart. This is an area comparison of certain scenarios that could occur over the next century. This is a scenario I generated. This is taking all of the Chernobyl restricted zone and the Fukushima zone and multiplying it by a factor of 10, assuming that we'd had 10 similar things, and then adding in all the mining resources needed to mine uranium and generate plutonium and build the plants, and put into that little sliver. And then I had to add a little more because Keynote wouldn't display the sliver if it was too small. So I added just enough to make sure it appeared. This graph here is a number I generated from an estimate from European source on how much, if we wanted to power the entire planet's source of energy, how much land we would have to devote towards wind collection using wind power. Wind power also, and I am absolutely not against wind power, I love it, but it also does not come at no environmental cost. It does do environmental destruction, it takes up land, it kills animals. It can't be claimed that it has no impact. It just can have less impact than alternatives. I made a similar crust here. Now this is actually, believe it or not very big if you plotted this area on the entire Earth. But if you wanted to power the entire Earth, that's how much solar would be able to consume. But the main reason I made this plot was not just to compare to nuclear, but I added up all the oil spills, not just this one, all the oil spills. And I couldn't make a plot like this because if you add up all the oil spills and compare it to any of these other sectors, it becomes just a sliver line. So what I gave instead as an example was the very well-known BP Gulf spill, which is not at all one of the biggest oil spills in history. It's actually quite a bit small. It's in the bottom 20. In fact, there's actually 250 plus oil spills going on right now that are unresolved. We recently had one in California that was related to natural gas, but there's actually oil spills going on. And this is a cost that comes with it. I'm not saying it means you can't have oil. I'm just saying when we go into the future and try and figure out together how we're going to pick the best sources of energy, we have to acknowledge that every type has its own side effects. And some are easy to see and some aren't. I think as a nuclear physicist, the biggest irony I found in looking into coal and oil mining is that coal and oil actually produce more radioactive byproducts than nuclear does, even when there's a spill. And the reason is because all things mined contain traces of radioactive isotopes like polonium, 210, and thorium, and uranium. And the quantity that you mine to produce this energy is so much bigger for oil and gas and fossil fuels than it is for the amount of uranium you use, that even that amount ends up being a bigger distributor of radioactive material. Okay, and then this one, just by comparison, is a totally unrelated but still terrifying side effect, which is this is the estimated size of the Pacific garbage patch, which is a zone that contains tiny particles of petroleum-related, but not specifically petroleum, pieces of plastic that are inside of gyres in the Pacific Ocean. And once again, I didn't add up all of them because then this plot would be too big. Yeah, this one is the, there's quite a lot of, there's a large disagreement between the size of it. It's by a factor of 10. So I took my sort of best guess, sort of averaging them. This is assuming it's the size of Texas. So that also gives you a scale of what these others are. So yeah, it's very big. We don't have to deal with it because it's out in the ocean on a daily basis, but it certainly has an impact on the planet. And it will for centuries unless we have some sort of magic solution. Oh, I'm absolutely taking that into account. So the exclusion zone for Fukushima is... well, there's not any significant concentration. I'll take questions at the end, okay? Okay. So, as I think we just ran into, there's a lot of controversy about nuclear. But there is an alternative that's coming up very soon, and I believe this will take over after the solar century, this century that we have coming up. And this is the, what you might be able to call the fusion era, but I think it's a little bit more appropriate to call it the dirty fusion era. I have a picture here of, this is a reactor that just came online. It's a research reactor. It's called the Stellarator. It's made in Germany. And it's a new twist based on supercomputer models to try and make fusion a little bit easier. But I don't think it takes a PhD to recognize that whatever the hell that is costs a lot of money. And this, this is not going to be an easy replacement. And so a lot of times people said, oh, fusion is like a distant promise. It's going to come. It's always 10 years in the future. It will eventually happen. But I already know from the way people are approaching it, it's not going to be a thing where you switch on the lights and suddenly electricity is free. Even when we solve the problem, when we break even, it's going to be a very long process to actually get that to a usable sense. Fusion, by contrast, is a thing that right now you can build a fission plant, a regular fission plant, and you can turn it on, and you know the cost and everything. I am a huge supporter of fusion research and everything. I think about it all the time myself. It's my dream as a kid to make one. It's just, I want everybody to realize it's not a thing where like a kid in a garage is going to turn it on and solve all our problems. The reason I call it the dirty fusion era, I'm like tempted not to call it that because it's no means dirty compared to fission or to coal or anything like that. But it does, the dirty fission era will be that we use tritium, deuterium, because those are the fuels available here on Earth. And these are use reactions that take tritium and deuterium, which are abundant in the ocean, but they do produce a little bit of radioactive material, but a very small amount. So it's called dirty, but not that dirty. I think this will power the Earth and any outposts we have or whatever easily for 3 to 5 centuries from now. The stage after that, I would say, is space solar, because in the end we have a giant reactor already running, and space solar has a lot of problems like directing energy beams to the Earth. Potentially that's weaponizable. It's not very cheap right now to launch things into space. But once we do that, the amount of solar power coming out of the sun dwarfs anything we could ever do here on Earth. So a lot of science fiction writers have talked about this. So this is on the order of millions of years of power. Thanks. So the final epoch in energy exploration that I know of. Now, physicists don't know about everything that has to do with the universe right now. This is just based on a model of what we have. But interestingly enough, one of the perfect fuels for fusion isn't even available here on Earth. It's helium-3. And it's super ironic that it's not here on Earth, because it's actually the third most abundant isotope in the universe. It's roughly 1 part in 10,000 of the entire universe from the materials made from the Big Bang. But because it is such a non-polluting fuel, it actually leaves the Earth as soon as it's made. It's made from deep cracks in the rock, and they bubble up, and then it blows off. But that's actually one of the reasons why it's such a great fuel. It has no radioactivity to it. It doesn't decay. You could transport it to the Earth even, and it could spill all over. You could dump billions of tons on it, and it would all disappear. So it's the ideal fuel of the future. But like I said, it's not here on Earth. So where is it? Well, it's actually all over the solar system. It's just not here. This is the main reason this is going to be powering the future in the next decade or so. There's a lot of it on the moon, but not that much. But where there is a lot of it is in gas giants and various asteroids and comets throughout the solar system, because they all still have anything heavy enough, like Saturn here is made of, like I said, 1/10,000th of it is helium-3. anything dense enough to hold it keeps it, and anything light like the Earth can't hold it. So that's my vision for the final epoch, and I call that the trans-solar epoch, because an advanced society could use this and find it anywhere. You don't even rely on the sun anymore at that point. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
There's been a drop over the last few years in solar energy costs. And there's some technology. This is like in photovoltaics, but you also have the notion of concentrating, solar towers and molten salts and things. How far down do you think the cost of concentrating solar could go?
Okay, that's a great question. So my specialty is actually in solar concentrators. I've helped start 3 companies on them. One of them is currently licensed to GE. Other successful attempts. A company I helped put solar panels on Google, for example. But my main focus is on the optics and designs having to do with solar concentrators for that reason. Right now, silicon solar voltaics has a hard limit at 25%. Not that that's a big deal, but the manufacturing of silicon is one of the main environmental costs. Solar concentrators really just require melting glass for the most part. There's glass mirrors, and it's just a matter of moving them. And moving them doesn't really take very much. So the cost for that, I think, can go very, very low. There's a lot of practical costs that get in the way. I mean, there's the fact that you have to be near a power grid. You have to consume a lot of water for those. In a state like California or Nevada, which has plenty of land to put solar concentrators on it, doesn't necessarily have access to that water. There's details like that. But a lot like fusion, it's not going to be a thing where it just... this might be a problem with the psyche, I think, we have with renewables, is that there's not going to be a giant, glorious moment when it suddenly is cheap. It's going to be...
What kind of is downslope and how far down?
like exact numbers for downslope?
Not exactly. I mean, I know you can't predict exactly, but roughly, are we talking about maybe a factor of 10 to 1 over a 30-year period or what?
I think in the next 30 years, you'll see it grow from, I think we're at 2% right now in California, to possibly 10% in the next 10 years. That's ambitious, but that has a lot to do with politics. The cost will keep going down. There's a lot of things having to do with miniaturization of motors and improvement in building materials for the mirrors and things like that. So there's a good outlook, I think, for it going down. I can't predict exactly because I think it's driven more by politics than by engineering, to be honest. Oh, at least on the short scale. On the long scale, it's a nice curve, flat thing, but.
In terms of fission reactors, in the long run, isn't the failure rate of fission reactors going to be 100%? They're all going to fail eventually, and we have to deal with the waste and the meltdowns of these things and the terrorism. I mean, it seems like it's going to be a 100% failure rate, and they're doomed to fail. There's no way they can, over the long haul, over hundreds of years, these things are going to survive.
Well, I mean, there's 500 reactors plus running in the world, and 2 have failed in all of human history in the last 150 years. Let's say in the last 50 years since they've been starting. So I would say that the assumption that 100% would fail is just totally wrong.
The number of failed is probably more like 10. I've worked in nuclear.
But in the long run, as the parts
Well, I
wear
guess
out...
it depends on what you mean by failure. I'm assuming a failure that causes an exclusion zone creation.
3 Mile Island, Chernobyl.
3 Mile Island didn't create an exclusion zone.
I didn't talk about that, but they're going to fail. The parts are going to wear out. They're going to be accidents. Inevitably, they're all going to fail over periods of hundreds of years. They're not designed to last that long, and there's nothing you can do with all the stuff that is created by them.
Why do you think there's nothing you can do with it?
What are they doing with it? They're just storing it. I mean, look at Fukushima. What are they going to do with all that stuff? They can't even deal with it.
It just sits there. That's what it was doing before. That's fine.
And it's pouring out into the ocean.
Look, here's the thing. The world is radioactive. You mentioned the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean has several million times more plutonium in it naturally dissolved than if all of the waste from Fukushima were dumped into the ocean. That's just, I mean, the world is radioactive. It's only a problem if it's concentrated. It's only a problem if you don't deal with it, like, say, take the radioactive waste and process it into something useful or bury it in a containment site. There's nothing, the failure occurs, both Chernobyl and Fukushima only occurred because the reactors were actively running and there was also no safe place to put the waste that was being stored on site for reasons that are purely political. If we treat this like grown-ups and we realize that there are risks that can be understood and we say, wait a minute, just one single oil spill is worse than all the exclusions of all accidents throughout the last 100 years, you're going to say it doesn't matter if they happen every so often. That's a price we're willing to pay. We have to say, yes, I'm not saying let's all have a Fukushima party. I'm saying that the exclusion zones created by Chernobyl and Fukushima are completely worth the cost of the destruction we do from the current alternatives.
So if like the nuclear reactor near New York City blows up, then, you know, that's worth it.
I would say, one, don't build a reactor very close to a heavily populated area. And I would say, two, evacuate New York in that scenario. Is that any different than any other attack that might happen on New York? If a terrorist had a nuclear weapon, which, by the way, has nothing to do with nuclear power plants, blows up New York, that's no different than a scenario. And I think that's actually a lot more likely. I think it's more likely we'll see an atomic bomb detonated on a highly populated area than a large reactor going off near a populated area.
You talked about the waste involved in creating current solar panels. Do you see technology in the future to replace the current solar panels with a cleaner, a version that has a cleaner manufacturing process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of the waste has to do with processing of silicon wafers, and a lot of those wafers right now are typically like 1 millimeter thick. The actual technology, even on the silicon wafers, doesn't have to be that thick. It doesn't have to involve that volume of material. And even on top of that, a lot of that waste is generated because these solar panels are being bought up by countries outside of China, but China has low regulation, so it's not even clear they're using the appropriate measures that could be used to mitigate these toxicities that are associated with it. There's a lot of other promising stuff that's research grade. It's not now grade. But I would put that almost on the same category as fusion. I mean, it's a thing that, yes, I believe will happen. And that's why I said that's one of the contributors to why I think this century will be the solar century, and why I'm not saying we should ditch fission right now and only go to solar. Because I think that at the moment, if you have the two options, the option of fission is currently better than solar. But down the road, there's no physics reason why you can't have a clean solar panel. Absolutely. Just one in the back.
What's your take on solar Sterling?
Solar Sterling.
So the company or the concept? Well, I worked for and I still do consulting for Bill Gross. He runs Idealab. He loves Stirling engines. I've worked with some Stirling engine companies. They're great. That's just a type of extracting solar thermal. So it's fine.
Is there any other questions? No. Okay, so one more.
Do you see the possibility of thorium reactors getting involved in this anywhere along the line?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So thorium solves the proliferation issue that you just brought up. Because there's no, at least that I know of, there's no non-classified method of turning a thorium reactor, any of the material from a thorium reactor, into a nuclear weapon. So you can have a fission-grade reactor, but you can't have a weaponizable material that comes out of it. But it doesn't solve the waste processing. It still creates fission daughters. It could still have a potential meltdown type situation. It might be lower, but again, it's a research topic. It's not a thing that somebody's actually demonstrated working. So I think it is very likely that could be a big part of the future also.
All right, so one more question. I'm glad you mentioned that wind power is also another form of solar power, because a lot of people miss that. But what about geothermic? Like,
Oh, geothermal is my favorite because nuclear physics actually has a lot to say with that. If you live in a place like Iceland, geothermal energy is fantastic, but it's very limited resource. A lot of people don't think of it as a limited resource because we think of the Earth as being really big and really hot. But using neutrino detection, we've actually finally been able to measure the actual heat output of the Earth. And frustratingly, it's not that far from what our total consumption is right now. So right now we use 12 terawatts, and it keeps going up because as poorer countries keep using more and more energy, the level of demand goes up. The Earth actually only produces 20 terawatts, which is shockingly low. If you compare that to the amount of solar power that's hitting the Earth, it's 100,000 times less. So even though it's a very nice and very unimpactful on the environment, because all you have to do is run water down and have it come back up, if you don't actually live near a hydrothermic vent like in Iceland, there really isn't that source is fairly limited. And it's a weird thing to think about, but if we actually did take all energy out of geothermal, we would literally start to cool the crust, which is a weird thing to say. But that actually happens when they go out and build it. They cool off a particular area and they have to move on to the next one. So it's okay as long as you don't have to keep doing it. And I wish I lived in Iceland because they have great energy prices.
thank you very much.
Thank you.